Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever it is that you are and wherever you may be. Thank you very much for making us a part of your day. I am Brad Franklin, a creative content writer here in Chesterfield. I'm very glad to tell you that Chesterfield Behind the Mic is on the air once again. Now, it is hurricane season. By the time you listen to this, I have no idea what may or may not be churning out in the Atlantic. Winter will be here soon. Word is it's going to be a little bit of a harder one, maybe a little bit more snowy for those of us who have four-wheel drive vehicles that we have not had a chance to drive around in the snow yet. We're kind of looking forward to. All of that stuff is part of why I have Jess Robison back on the show. One of our initial first guests on the podcast. She is the Emergency Management Coordinator for Chesterfield County. First, Jess, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Great, Brad. How are you? I
am doing very well. I really appreciate you being here. Appreciate you coming on to talk a little bit about emergency management and communications and preparedness and all that kind of stuff. Considering the sort of time of year, right?
Yep.
It is the time to be talking about it, which is why we had you here in the same sort of time frame a couple years ago when we launched the show. Before we get started, for those who maybe didn't see that episode, I kind of want to recap your role as the coordinator for emergency management. You know, we've had you here before, but sure. For those who may not have been familiar with you or your work or seen that show the first time you were here, tell the good folks about your role as the emergency management coordinator and kind of how you came to be here.
Sure. So, as the emergency management coordinator for the county, it's my responsibility to make sure that our county is prepared for a wide array of emergencies and disasters. Now, I don't typically focus on the day-to-day emergencies that are easily and well handled by fire, police, right. and first responders.
Right.
We're talking wide-scale emergencies that require a lot of resources, right. A lot of different county departments, mm-hmm. and that really require residents to take a proactive role in, ensuring they're okay,
right.
and prepared.
So these are weather events. These are some sort of natural disaster sort of things.
Weather, we look at all hazards. So right. Whether it's natural, man-made, technological, mm-hmm. We're watching it all. We have mm-hmm. a list of hazards in our emergency operations plan, which anyone can find online. And, we try to do preparedness efforts,
right.
trainings, exercises, and planning that meet the needs of the impacts of all those disasters.
Right. Now, in terms of, my next question is a perfect segue. I wanted to get in some of the things that you do. We recently did a tabletop down at VDM about a weather event where there were multiple tornadoes, and we were kind of talking through as various different localities in the region. Yep. How would you respond to this? What would you do? And it was extremely eye-opening for a variety of different reasons. Not the least of which was that one of those tornadoes went literally over my house because they actually did some took real world a real world weather event and put it literally on the map of Central Virginia.
Correct.
But I know we're also doing a full scale exercise in October, which I'm sure you're both excited and
that is consuming a lot of my time recently.
Bet, yeah. So what are the kinds of things that you take part in? How beneficial are those types of exercises of those types of situations, those things? How beneficial are they for not just what you do, but also for make sure the folks around you, like me, understand what's going on?
Absolutely. So when we talk about emergency and disaster response, it's a team sport. It's all hands on deck. Everyone has a role to play. Whether it is, response to the actual incident site, whether it's mass care and human services to provide services to those impacted, or whether it's public information and communication, which is, of course, where you and your team come in.
Right.
It's a team sport. So what we do is we do a collective planning process where all of the players come together, mm-hmm. and we develop a plan where roles and responsibilities are assigned.
Right.
And then what we do is we move forward to the training and then exercise portion where we make sure everybody understands their roles.
Right.
Make sure, they have what they need to complete those tasks.
Right.
And then we test it, right? Yeah. And when we do exercises, we aren't testing the people and their ability to do their job. We're testing the plan.
Right.
Because everything looks great on paper until you go to
Till
try
you go
it.
do it, right.
And then you're like, ooh, was not expecting that. So we want to find those gaps and close them before we're actually doing it for real.
Right. Now, that's a good sort of message to take forward as we talk about hurricane preparedness in a minute, because a lot of people understand, we talk about hurricanes or winter weather, what prep means, right?
Yeah.
So for those of us, in public service, especially folks in your role who are thinking about wide scale response,
Yep.
that there's you have to work your plans just like, folks, have to have, their stuff ready for this or that.
Correct.
Before we get into that, let me start simple. Why is it so essential, in your opinion, for folks to have a plan in the case of an emergency?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's super important for people to know what to do in various kinds of situations. If we have a wide scale disaster, I mean, we have finite resources for a period of time until we can get the cavalry to arrive, so to speak.
Yeah.
So we want our residents to be knowledgeable and ready to basically be able to take care of themselves and one another for at least 72 hours. That's FEMA's benchmark.
Okay.
We say, hey, if you can, sustain yourselves for a week without power, without, maybe other essentials that were creature comforts of living that we're used to.
Right.
That just makes it that much easier for a response because that still frees up our first responders to deal with life-threatening emergencies and protection of life, property, and those emergent type calls versus I don't have power.
Yeah, right. Or, yeah, exactly. I ran out of Coca-Cola. Listen, as somebody who likes Coca-Cola, that's actually kind of an
Diet Coke is my vice.
Now, let's talk about hurricanes. So, again, I mentioned it before, but who knows by the time somebody hears this what may or may not be out in the Atlantic and, sending us all into a tizzy. But from a hurricane preparedness standpoint, what are some of the things folks should do in order to be ready should the remnants of something make its way up to our area? And I mean, I pose that question and think to myself, I mean, technically, the actual hurricane could still be a hurricane. It could not, it's not necessarily just the remnants, right? It could be,
absolutely,
depending on how, direct the shot is. But in terms of hurricane preparedness, what are some of the things people should be thinking about? And what are some of the things you would advocate for them to seriously consider as they're putting their plan together?
So, I mean, we have 3 steps to preparedness, right? We have make a plan, get a kit, stay informed. When we talk about the planning process, that could be a communications plan. So you know how to communicate with family members, to include what if the cell service goes down?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that texting can actually get through when phone calls can't.
Right. Yep.
We have text to 911. A lot of people don't know that either. So learning those alternate communication paths when phone lines are not necessary, when they're jammed up or not operational.
Right.
How to get out of your home, how to get out of your neighborhood, where to meet. So there's a lot of great plan templates that families can use on FEMA or on VDEM. They're linked through our webpage as well.
Okay.
And plan as a family to include children.
Okay.
That way, children feel empowered when they know what to do.
Absolutely.
And it helps bring down the stress level of the adults in the household as well.
Right.
Of course, you want to get your supplies. There's a great emergency checklist on VDEM's website, and that's the Virginia Department of Emergency Management.
Yep.
And they will also, go through your pet's checklist, if there's medical or functional needs.
Yeah.
Very comprehensive, highly recommended. But there's also another aspect of preparedness that people don't tend to think about in planning, and that's the financial portion.
Oh, right.
Of planning.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because it's one thing to stock up your
Absolutely.
batteries and flashlights and stuff, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
So when we have a great class called Financial Preparedness for Emergencies, and anyone can contact the emergency management office here. We'll be happy to set it up for a group, But what we do is we take FEMA's emergency financial first aid kit, which is available online, or we have print copies. And we talk about the financial impacts of disasters.
Right.
Getting through a disaster is a inconvenience compared to the recovery.
Right.
We don't talk about the recovery enough, which means after, how do we put things back together after the disaster leaves? And so we talk about being aware of finances, how to start saving with an emergency in mind, like we do for other big life events, right? College, marriages,
Weddings,
buying a first
babies.
house, retirement.
Right.
Emergency funds don't seem to get that much.
Yeah, they don't get that kind of limelight.
No,
Yeah.
they don't, but they're really important. And we talk about insurance as well. Folks need to know that generally flood insurance is not part of homeowners,
Right.
but is highly recommended even if you don't live in a flood zone.
Right.
And what we're finding too with the increase in the economy and the inflation, folks are actually underinsured.
Right.
So we always advocate for everyone to go over their insurance policy to make sure that it's still adequate coverage.
Right.
It's not enough just to be covered.
Right.
It needs to be adequate.
Right.
We've seen this actually as recently as the tornadoes in Virginia Beach. A lot of those folks were underinsured, which means money out of the pocket.
Right.
We've had house fires where, folks are insured, but they didn't have enough insurance to cover like the debris removal.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's interesting too, because if you think about it, like you could have a bottle of water. That means you have water, but you don't have enough water to cover you and your whole family and your pets and such
Correct.
and such, right? So it's a whole, kind of if you think about it, sort of that analog of there's a lot more that goes into to having stuff than just having simply a single box checked
Correct.
off.
And what's super great about the class we offer is we also talk about the myths and realities of FEMA assistance. FEMA is not in the business. They don't have the ability to write checks to replace someone's whole life.
Right.
So we always encourage insurance, and we explain the difference of what FEMA is able to give you versus, what being properly insured is going to give you.
Right. Now, I know because of this time of year, hurricane preparedness is obviously a big focal point. But since I got you here, I want to talk a little bit about sort of winter weather too.
Yeah.
Much like hurricanes, there's also the chance that, winter weather can,
Absolutely.
Prove especially severe. Sometimes when you're not necessarily expecting it, I think a lot of folks have probably been lulled into a little bit of a state of asleep, so to speak, when it comes to storms, because I don't think that there were a lot of them last year where I thought we were going to get any snow and we just didn't, but it definitely felt like all winter long we just never, and it was never like a big threat.
Sure.
And so I'm curious to see this winter, because the expectation, at least from the meteorology folks, is that it's going to be a colder, wetter, more snowier sort of situation. And in terms of that, what should folks be thinking about when it comes to being prepared for winter weather, other than, actually heeding the warnings that they're going to get for storms that are likely to come?
Yeah, of course, you want to stay tuned to the watches, warnings, and travel, advisories or what have you, recommendations. We have to understand, I know we are a very diverse community here, and a lot of us, like myself, come from the northern states where 6 inches of snow maybe puts a 2-hour delay on your day. But here in Virginia, we don't have the resources that the northern states do to quickly, treat and clear roads. We have very limited resources.
Right. And some of those roads are not in a position to be treated.
They are not.
Or whatever.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, don't chance it, obviously. But always have emergency supplies in your vehicle.
Right.
Blankets, snacks, water. The same thing you would keep in your home, keep in your vehicle.
Right.
Always keep your vehicle, above, I would say, half tank of gas.
Yeah.
That way, if you do get stuck, you can at least keep the car on, the heat on. They have awesome heated blankets now. You plug into the outlets of your car. Make sure you have, I always recommend traveling with a weather radio.
Right.
I recommend, traveling with a car kit with like flares, kitty litter, etc. Basically, you can get a whole great list of items to put in a car kit online as well, from FEMA and VDEM to make sure you're prepared. So if the worst does happen and you do get stuck somewhere, you at least have the supplies to take care of yourself until it can get cleared up or you can be rescued.
I mean, those folks who were on 95 probably didn't.
Yes.
They weren't thinking that day.
No.
Hey, here's the day that I wish I had the kit in my car.
Right.
But man, they really wish they had the kit.
Yeah,
in the car.
and 95 is such a main thoroughfare. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought that of all the
Right?
places? And you know, it's really funny that you say that because like I've always historically thought like, well, if you're on the main roads, those are going to get to be the ones that are the most passable, the most treated, and such and such. And sometimes that is true, and sometimes maybe it's not.
Right.
You know?
And we have to just realize and accept the fact that weather is highly unpredictable, even though our best attempts to predict it and forecast it. You know, roads can freeze quickly, bridges even quicker. You know, lanes can become impassable because of a pile up. So you just want to be prepared no matter where you're at and make sure you have enough stuff to sustain yourself.
It's interesting to think of that extension of not just prepare your house, you know, because a lot of us think of like hunkering down, you know, for a snowstorm. But I mean, there are people that might have to go out in the world. And if you do, being prepared is a good reason. You mentioned weather radios. I want to get into communications before we wrap up. You know, in the event of any emergency, there's going to be ways that officials like yourself, folks at the county, folks at the state, are going to want to get communication out to residents. And here in Chesterfield, obviously, there's Chesterfield Alert. There's the iPause, which is the integrated public warning system. We use the weather radios. There's social media. There's traditional media. There's all this stuff. But let's work through those because I want to talk a little bit about sort of like what are the types of messages and where are folks going to hear about them? Because I wonder, especially in the age where cell phones are so they are the backbone by which it seems like their communications are based, right?
Correct.
Well, in the event of an emergency, those cell phone towers might be down.
That's also correct.
And having not too long ago experienced a period where there was a cell tower near me that was being worked on, and I could not, under any circumstances, get my phone to see another cell tower. It was like I lived in the black hole where I could get data, but I couldn't make any calls. And it was weird. And I'm just curious to get your point of view on sort of how those kind of mediums, so to speak, of communication, how they kind of stack up for you and what people should know about them.
Sure. So first, you know, it's important to put out there that we want people to be getting their notifications, messaging, and information in multiple different ways.
Right.
So knowing that, you know, cell phones are the backbone really of our lives right now in information gathering and communication. First of all, make sure you have one of those portable power banks, and it's always charged.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And again, car adapters, cars with gas start. So if you have a car, you can at least, you know, find ways of keeping your devices charged. But having those multimodal ways of getting alerts in case those cell towers are down is so critically important. So for Chesterfield Alert, that's our opt-in system.
Right.
This is where emergency management can send out notifications to residents. It could be countywide. It could be targeted to a specific neighborhood. And it'll have some kind of associated action with it. It'll have information and an action. So we're not going to double down and say, hey, there's a tornado watch in your area. The National Weather Service has that covered. But if we did have a tornado in an area and we needed those folks to know we had a family assistance center open somewhere, we want to make sure they get that information, you know, where that's at and how they can get that help.
Right.
So Chesterfield Alert, we can send out in multiple different ways: text, email, phone call. The resident chooses. The resident can put in multiple different address points as well. So for me, I have work, I have home, I have my kids' schools.
Right.
So that way, if there is a geo-targeted alert in any of those areas, I'm getting it.
Right. And real quick, let me interrupt you there because you mentioned schools and it made me think.
Yep.
Do the school system have their own? I mean, because they have a whole separate apparatus for communicating.
Right.
So in that instance, would we kind of like parrot, so to speak, right? Like help broadcast out what they send, or we only focus on the county side, they focus on the school side?
So schools generally focuses on their school messaging to parents, students, faculty. If there was something happening in a neighborhood where a school was contained, we would send out a message
to the neighborhood.
Right.
Not necessarily just about the school. I got you.
Correct. So it's not necessarily just it's not a school related incident. It's more of a larger scale.
Got it.
But in a quick emergent message, obviously text is best.
Right.
You know, phone calls take a little bit to get out when there's a lot of numbers associated.
Absolutely.
And email, hopefully, you know, people see it if it comes up as a notification.
Right. Yeah.
Text is always best.
Well, give the folks real quick while I'm thinking about it. Give the folks how to sign up for Chesterfield Alert.
Sure. If you go to chesterfieldalert.com, you can register and sign up. We have a billboard at the mall right now with a QR
nice.
code. Yeah, and it has a picture of from the 200 or the 700-year flood back in 2020. So it's eye-catching. You can go to our website. We have flyers. We're happy to provide flyers for communities. We have them in both English and Spanish. But here's how much we want to get this message out. We have roughly 383,000 residents in our county.
I like how you said roughly, and then you like kept drilling in the number. I like that.
Roughly.
Yeah, roughly.
We have less than 21,000 resident registrations on Chesterfield Alert.
Yeah.
And we've used Chesterfield Alert.
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely want people to sign up for that. We have the iPause system,
right,
which is the integrated public alerting and warning system.
Mm-hmm.
That is the ability to send out a text message to phones that are not opted in. So think National Weather Service type alerts.
Right.
Those are used in very specific cases.
Yeah. Very specific, very serious situations.
Absolutely.
Right.
If we were conducting an evacuation of some sort, we would use iPause.
Yeah.
But
like if the if something was going to flood because it failed.
Correct.
You know? Right.
If we had a dam about ready to be breached or was it absolutely. But we are not going to use iPause for everything that we would use Chesterfield Alert for.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So, that's also an option for us.
Right.
And then, of course, traditional media. Right?
Yeah.
Which you can speak to that. So, Brad, tell me, what are the pros and cons of traditional media?
I don't know if you actually want me to answer it, but I do actually think it's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I think folks need to understand about traditional media is they're only as good as the information they get, but that their focus is not necessarily on all of the details of whatever that information is. So, for example, it's very common for traditional media to lump locations together.
Sure.
We're seeing this in X, Y, Z, A, B, and C. Well, in all of those letters and all those localities, right, the intricacies of what they're experiencing are a little different. So it's always better for us to communicate directly with Chesterfield residents.
Yeah.
Just like it's, in the other localities, it's good for them to communicate directly with their residents. And so I would say the traditional media is a good way to sort of have a good idea of what's going on. But by and large, what they're hopefully doing is that we're able to get stuff out on social media from the official channels, and then they're picking that up. But you definitely are getting into situations where they're not telling you. It's not necessarily that they mean to leave out details. It's just that it's not, that medium is not built to speak to the intricacies of everybody's situation. So it's much better to be in, whether it's Chesterfield Alert or even weather radios to some extent, right? Oh. Like you can get more information specific there versus, and I know you're a big weather radio person.
I am, and call me old fashioned, but it's shocking to me how many folks I run into that no longer have weather radios because cell phones.
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you that weather radios are the best redundant way of getting emergency information.
Yeah.
You can power them 6 different ways: batteries, electricity, crank, solar. You can actually get them to where they will charge your phone for you. So,
which is a fun little.
It is a fun little extra.
Exercise. Yeah, it's
a little
nice.
extra. But really, with weather radios, they should be on all of the time in your home,
right?
Even on blue sky days.
That's right, because you can't plan from. This is not how a lot of.
No.
Yes, sometimes the weather comes on like, yep, Hurricane Brad is tooling along the coast, right? But you might not always know that this thing is going to happen, and it's good to know that the weather radio is always sort of listening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can't predict every emergency or event, and I don't want folks waiting until something could be going wrong to realize my weather radio doesn't work. The batteries have been corroded. It's not programmed correctly, and becomes ineffective. And we do have the ability to work with our partners at the National Weather Service in Wakefield to issue non-weather related emergency messaging over weather radios should our cell service go down.
Redundancy again. We're recording a podcast right now. I'm currently recording in 2 different locations just in case, right? Because you never really know, because hey, if this hard drive over here breaks, at least, I've got something here. Now, if they both break, hey, you know what, 700-year flood. But on some level, like redundancy in a lot of, especially emergency situations, it is the thing that can protect you almost from the thing you can't think about.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to have plan A, B, and generally C.
Right.
To make sure all your bases are covered.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, Jess, I think that one of the things that I've heard today is that not only is it good to have a plan, but it's also good to sort of visit those plans. And I know that's something you guys do a lot. Do you have any other words of wisdom for the folks during, whether it's hurricane season, the pending winter season ahead? What are some of your final thoughts for folks?
Yeah, just kind of one more thing with communications. Social media, great way of getting information out, but we ask that you pay attention to official sources.
Right.
And, not necessarily the neighborhood pages. We do, during disasters, get a lot of misinformation starting to be spread around.
Right.
And then that makes it even harder for us to communicate effectively.
Yeah.
So, vetting information through official sources is a huge, huge, huge help for us, really.
For sure.
But, when it comes to preparedness, we always want you to reach out. We have great information and activities for adults, children, seniors. We love coming out and doing presentations and classes.
Right.
We're always available. But really, dig into that financial preparedness aspect. If you feel like you've got your supplies down,
that's the next step. Yeah.
That is the next step.
Good deal. Well, Jess, thank you very much for coming back on the podcast. Very happy to have you back on the show, and very much appreciate all the information you shared.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing me back.
All right. Make sure you check us out on social media, those official channels. It's Twitter, it's Chesterfield VA, and on Instagram, it's Chesterfield Virginia, all one word. And on Facebook, you can check out our podcast page. Just search Chesterfield Behind the Mic. Now, make sure to follow or subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Overcast, or wherever it is that you get your shows. And if you'd like to leave us a rating or review, we greatly appreciate it. As always, a video version of the show is available on our YouTube channel as well as on our website, chesterfield.gov/podcast. That's also where you can submit feedback anytime, make suggestions, or just reach out to us. You can also watch the show on WCCT Thursday through Sunday at 7, on the weekends at noon. That's Comcast Channel 98 and Verizon Channel 28. Lastly, you can check out chesterfield.gov/connect with us to find out a number of other ways to connect with Chesterfield County. My thanks to my director, Martin Stith, my executive producer, Teresa, Bonifas, and all the good folks from Constituent Media Services for all they do. And my thanks to you for joining us today. So, from all of us here in Chesterfield, thanks again for making us a part of your day. We'll see you again real soon. Take good care.